Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of October of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction. As you can see, we have lots of icons, and the Russians, without any operational pause, continue moving further in the direction of the village by the name of Novoukrainka. Today we have additional geolocations of how the Russians were bombing the village itself in the southern part, which confirms something like artillery preparation before the beginning of full-scale offensive. We expect the Russian movements to start within the next few days. Also, we have very important video from the road between the village of Novoukrainka and the village of Bogoyavlenka. I'll remind you that this is one of the most important logistic roads that Ukrainians are using to support their forces between the villages, and as we can see, according to this video, the Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over the road, and the Russians are not allowing the Ukrainians to feel free themselves in this direction. Furthermore, we have additional FPV drone attacks in the fields between the village of Bogoyavlenka and the rich dense network of the fortifications between village of Bogoyavlenka and the village of Katerynivka. This is very important because the Russians are going to first clear these fields at the first Russian target, the first Russian objective, as the next stage of the special military operation in this direction. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, we have additional changes on the ground between the mine South Donbass number 3 and the village of Bogoyavlenka. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were FPV droning the Russians exactly in this point, and most likely those that led from the 72nd Mechanized Brigade still try to show some resistance in this direction. According to information we have, the brigade was completely destroyed, and those who managed to survive currently are taking their positions along basically the line between Novoukrainka, Bogoyavlenka and Katerynivka, and according to information we have, nobody is going to replace them. So the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult. They're waiting for another Russian attempt, for another Russian offensive operation, and very likely the Ukrainians will not be able to show any resistance to the Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in Katerynivka. During the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions between the village itself and the road TO524. Basically, the Russians managed to answer the farms in the southern part. Furthermore, these reports, these updates that were published by pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral sources were published somewhere around 20 hours before this video. So most likely during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, and maybe the Russians have already took under control the farms, and maybe there are already clashes on the territory of the village itself. So let's wait for additional updates, and then everything is become clear to us. Anyway, while the Russians are moving in the direction of Katerynivka, the Russian FPV drone forces are attacking and destroying the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian temporary deployment points and positions on the territory of the settlement itself. For example, in this video we can see a Ukrainian vehicle that was attacked by the Russian FPV drone. In this video we can see the same story, but during the day period of time, another vehicle of the armored forces of Ukraine was destroyed by the Russian FPV drone. For example, in this video we can see massive artillery strike on the village with the Russian artillery with the use of Krasnopol accurate shells. So as you can see, the Russians are very focused in this direction, the Ukrainians are suffering losses, and the battle for Katerynivka, the battle on the territory of Katerynivka, is just a matter of few days. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the most important update. Let's talk about the cauldron of Gornyak. So this is the next disaster, and this is the next tragedy of armored forces of Ukraine in the Kurachovo-Pokrovsk direction. Currently, there are very big group of Ukrainian forces is located exactly between these settlements, these fields, and the fortifications. There are forces of 46th Air Mobile Brigade. There are forces of 59th. There are forces of different territory defense brigade. So a lot of units of the armored forces of Ukraine currently concentrated in these fields, and for some reason the Ukrainians decided not to evacuate soldiers and personnel from this cauldron. For some reason the Ukrainians decided to repeat the story and the destiny of Ugledar. Let's discuss in details. Just yesterday we were talking that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt along the railways and to take under control the eastern part of the village of Ostrov Ostrovskaya. This is the village. And today on the 4th of October, we got geolocations that confirm this information. This video was published by the 46th Air Mobile Brigade, and this video shows number of FPV drone attacks on Russian vehicles. So I would like to point your attention. So the video begins exactly on the southeastern part of the village. So this is the village itself, this is the streets, this is the buildings, this is the railway, and this is the railway on the video, and this is Russian tank that Ukrainians attacked few seconds later, and this is the point that was geolocated on the map. So a lot of artillery strikes, a lot of vehicles, a lot of tanks and personal carriers the Russians were using for this offensive operation. Most of the attacks, as you can see, took place when the Russian vehicles were already returning back home, returning back in the direction of Donetsk, which confirms that the Russians finished the landing operation successfully, and the Russian troopers began clearing the village while the vehicles were returning back in the direction of maybe Selidovskaya, prison number 82, or in the direction of the village by the name of Ostraya. Anyway, the latest updates, the freshest updates about the situation in Ostrovskaya, we got around 20 hours ago. The same story, and most likely during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to finish the battle for this settlement completely. So I will not be surprised if we, during the next few days or few hours, we receive additional updates from different mappers that the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to establish complete control over this territory and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So this is the situation on this flank. Now let's move in the northern part, and as for the village of Turina, we haven't received lots of updates. We haven't received even a single geolocation that can improve the situation, let's say physically, with changes on map, but we got some posts from different mappers. For example, the pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the eastern part, and some pro-Russian sources reported that Russian troopers managed to cross the railways and to establish positions on the Ukrainian side of the railways of the village of Turina. Very important progress. Furthermore, I'll remind you that yesterday we got report from the eastern part of Novoselidovka, this one, that the first Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group entered this village. They cut this territory in two, and they cut the main supply roads between Novoselidovka and Izmailovka. So they cut the supply road between the mainland and this Gornyak-Kurachovka cauldron. Now let's add some lines to have better understanding of the situation. So summarizing everything according to different, mainly pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the situation on the ground. We already calculated the distance between edge Russian positions in the northern part of the cauldron and in the southern part, and the distance is around 5 kilometers. But now this is not the most important. Once again, I would like to point your attention to the main supply roads that goes from the mainland in the direction of this Gornyak-Kurachovka cauldron. There is just one road that goes in this area, and this road, let's say, starts somewhere in the area of Berestki. Then this road goes to the village of Ilinka, and then this road goes to these intersections of roads, and one road goes next in the northern directions towards the town of Gornyak. Another road goes in the eastern direction towards the town of Kurachovskaya, and another road is going in the southern direction towards the village of Volchansk. So this is the situation: one road and three small roads inside of this cauldron. But just for the previous 24 hours, as you can see, we received significant number of geolocations along the main supply road. The Russian sources published just 3 videos or 3 episodes of one video of how the Russian FPV drone operators were attacking Ukrainian vehicles that were trying either to evacuate, to bring additional ammo, or maybe just they were moving from one point to another, making rotation. But of course, if we compare and if we analyze videos of FPV drone attacks just for one day, this is not enough of information to make any conclusions. To understand what exactly is happening in this, I would say, Kurachovka cauldron, it's better to increase the numbers of updates at least for 1 week. So let's increase the numbers of updates exactly from this direction, starting of the 29th of September, because 29th of September is the beginning beginning of this week. This is the previous Sunday. So this is the current situation in this area for the previous week. And as you can see, we can see the significant number of FPV drone attacks exactly along the main supply roads. We can count them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 cases, 16 events of FPV drone attacks along the main supply roads. And this is just the number of information, the number of updates for 1 week starting from the 29th of September. And you need to understand that we received much more updates, but most of them haven't been geolocated because due to bad quality or something like this, we have added just maybe 25 or maybe 30% of those events that were published exactly from this direction. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that somewhere around from 50 till 80 cases of FPV drone attacks have already taken place along these let's say roads since the beginning of this week, which confirms that the Ukrainian army that currently is located in the village, in the town of Gornyak, in the town of Kurachovka, village Volchansk, Alexandra, Polynzariana, are already got into operational encirclement. Summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians have just 1 or 2, maybe 3 days if they want to save their army. If Ukrainians decide to stay in this direction for more than 5 days, most likely the group of Ukrainian forces that are currently located in this area will repeat the same story and the same destiny of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade that was completely destroyed on the territory of Ugledar. And if we compare these two strongholds, as for Ugledar, at the beginning of the battle for this citadel there were around 1,500 soldiers. As for this direction, there are 3 Ugledars in the same area, so we can make a conclusion that the number of forces that are currently located in this area varies from 3,000 soldiers to 4,500 soldiers, which is 3 times more in comparison with Ugledar. And if the Ukrainians lose this significant number of soldiers in this direction, this might be significant. This might have significant consequences not just for this block and for the town, the city of Kurakhov itself. Most likely this will lead to complete collapse of the western Donetsk direction and the south Donetsk direction. We are talking about the line between the village or the city of Selidova and the city of Velika Novoselovka. And if Ukrainians lose this foothold, lose this bridgehead, it's very difficult to understand, very difficult to project where exactly the Ukrainians will be able to slow down the Russians. To slow down, we are not talking about to stop the Russians, just to slow down. So the situation is very critical. Once again, if Ukraine wants to save their personnel, if they want not to have completely collapsed lines, they need to begin evacuation from this pocket within the next 3 days. Then it's going to be late. It's going to be late, but as we know, Zelensky, he will not give this order. Most likely he will order completely opposite, ordering the Ukrainians to stay on these territories till the end, till the last Ukrainian. I think that this is going to happen exactly this has already happened during the battle for Ugledar. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Selidova direction. During the previous 24 hours, we have some small changes to the southwest of Novogrodovka. We have information from neutral mappers that they confirm additional progress of the Russians and that the Russians answered the city of Selidova from the north, and we have very small progress on the ground on the territory of Lisovka. This information was provided also by neutral mappers, yet we haven't received anything that can confirm additional Russian progress along these gray zones to the west of Novogrodovka. Now let's move to the Toretsk agglomeration, and we have very interesting updates. The most important is that currently we can see a very big Russian activity in the southern block of Toretsk. We are talking about the block by the name of Zabalka. So this is the area we are talking about. During the previous few months, the Russians managed to answer this block in the southern part, but after that the Russians stopped. And the main reason why the Russians stopped, because it was difficult to move further in the northern direction, because this block has a very good support from mines and from this area. area. And the Ukrainians, for supporting their forces in the bloc by the name of Zabalka, were using this road for supply, support, evacuation, rotation, and so on. So the Ukrainians were able to move along these lines and to have everything necessary in this part of Toretsk to fight with the Russians. As you can see, if we take a look at this block, there are a lot of high-rise building areas, which makes this entire block as a one big citadel. And the Russians, of course, they know everything. They analyzed everything, and the Russians came to the conclusion that the only one way to defeat the Ukrainians in this block is to take under control this intersection of lines. This is the intersection between the railways that goes from the mines and the road that goes from the north. And this is the reason why the Russians during the previous week were completely focused in developing their positions in the area of this citadel. Once again, this is the 27th of September. This is the situation on the ground around a week ago, and this is exactly how the situation was developing. First, the Russians improved their positions, then this information was confirmed by different geolocations, then the Russians moved further, the rest of this block was confirmed also by some geolocations, then the Russians improved their positions once again, and this is the current situation. So as you can see, during the previous week, the Russians were completely focused in taking under complete control this citadel, and the main purpose of these attacks was to establish physical and fire control over this area. And now the Russians complete this road for 100%. The Ukrainians lost their possibilities to supply and support their forces in this part, in Zabalka. Of course, they can use just the regular army, they can use troopers, the soldiers can move freely between the block of this citadel, the mine citadel, and with this block. But when talking about, for example, normal logistic with vehicles, with evacuation of wounded, and so on, the Ukrainians lost this possibility. Maybe there are some small local roads between the village of Lyubimovka, Leonidovka, and this citadel itself, but these roads are going through the fields which are under complete Russian FPV drone control. So the situation for the Ukrainians in this block become very, very difficult. And as soon as the Russians established complete control over this part, the Russians resumed their attempts to attack from the south. And currently there are very heavy clashes exactly for this territory. The Russians are saying waves by waves of soldiers trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back. We start receiving first geolocations, and this is exactly this block, the block of Zabalka. And I would like to point your attention that the significant part of this block is under complete fire, a lot of explosions, a lot of artillery strikes, 50% of this block is already burned or reduced to ruins. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians are moving in the northern direction, and the main purpose of the Russians is to maintain the line of combat contact at least along this line, which will allow the Russians to semi-encircle this citadel from the south, from the southwest, from the southeast, and to begin the battle for this stronghold. Because as soon as this stronghold falls, and as soon as the Russians are able to take this stronghold under control and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the northern direction, we can say that the battle for Toretsk has ended, because the rest of Toretsk has no value and is going to be not a very big problem for the Russians to finish. It's going to be just a matter of maybe 1 or 2 weeks. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. We have additional changes on the ground. According to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions in fields. According to different mappers, they have already improved their positions a few days ago, but just today we got geolocation that confirms Russian progress. In this video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, we can see FPV drone attack on Russian vehicle. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Now let's move in the north in Kupiansk direction, and according to information we have, the Russians managed to enter the village of Kruglyakivka. So after a very long period of time, after very bloody and very heavy clashes for the villages like Tabayevka, Berestova, Pishana, Stelmachovka, Krakhmalna, Novoselovka, after the flower of Pishane bloomed completely, the Russians entered the first village along the river of Oskol. So today on the 1st of October, we can say that this is the official date of the beginning of battle for the river of Oskol, for the Russian side of this river. And this is very important, because if the Russians are able to take under control these positions along the river, they will reduce and they will ruin the Ukrainian logistic completely, because the Russians and the Ukrainians have almost the same number of forces in this direction. But the problem is that if the Russians take under control the villages Kolesnikov and Kruglyakivka, so this territory that we have already added just on map, then the Russians will be able to decide where to attack next. The Russians can concentrate certain forces and they can make a decision to move in the northern direction, or the Russians will change their mind and they will attack in the southern direction. For the Russians, there's going to be no problem to make any decision to attack in any direction, but for the Ukrainians, all these changes can lead to the significant logistic problems, because once again the Russians and the Ukrainians have almost the same number of forces on this direction, and if the Russians decide to move in the north, then the Ukrainians will be forced to begin redeployment of their forces, let's say from Barova first to the west and then in the northern direction and then to the east. But if the Russians then decide to move in the southern direction, the Ukrainians will be forced to make the same maneuver, but this time they will be forced to redeploy forces back in the southern direction. And of course, all these movements, all these redeployments from the south to the north and from the north to the south will be connected with the significant losses from the Ukrainian side during this process. And this is exactly what the Russians are planning to achieve. And I think that Ukrainians will not do this. I think that Ukrainians, when they realize that the Russians are going to use these tactics, these maneuvers, most likely they will decide to abandon the northern Kupiansk direction in favor of the common lines, in favor of the common defense of this direction. They will decide, I think so, it's a smart idea, it's smart to make this decision, not to fight, not to play in this game. But once again, we have Zelensky in power. As a president, he can make any decision, and he can even make a decision to counterattack the Russians using full-scale offensive operation somewhere in this area. Who knows? Now let's move to Volchansk. As for this town, we continue receiving the same videos of how the Russians are using different kind of FABs and different kind of ADAP 1500 in the central citadel. Another very heavy explosion that deals significant damage to the Ukrainians in this area. So this is something like the test polygon. Now let's talk about the Kursk direction, and during the previous 24 hours we haven't received any updates about any activity, just regular artillery strikes, regular activity of Russian FPV drones, of Russian aviation, some activity of Ukrainian FPV drones, of how they were attacking and destroying Russian reconnaissance equipment. So just a regular activity, completely stabilized front line. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians made any attempts to attack each other during the previous 24 hours. So this is the situation in this direction. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.